Hello everyone, and welcome to the EUPATI webinar. Today we're going to be talking about community advisory boards, and I'm very glad to see that there are many people interested in the idea of community advisory boards. I have with me two guests today, two marvelous guests who have a lot of experience in this field, Giulio Maria Corbelli and Jan Geisler. I am Rob Camp, and I am working also in Ecabs, in community advisory boards at UArtis right now. But most of the, almost 99% of the webinar will be with our guests. So let me just go briefly through the introductory slides I have, just to give you an idea of what a Ecab is. As we all understand and are seeing more and more every day, is that really patient involvement in the research and development life cycle is very much starts from when the molecule is nothing but an idea in the head of a scientist, when they're still thinking about what are our research priorities and what do we want to achieve. We call in patients immediately. All through the life cycle, we do the same thing. Whenever there's an important step in the clinical development life cycle, we talk to patients, and then including on the other end of the life cycle, going through to approval and post-approval. And this slide is from Jan Geisler, one of today's guests, with other authors from a paper in 2016. And just very briefly, a community advisory board is a group of patients who try to offer their expertise to sponsors of clinical research. It basically involves working with sponsors on the overall research program development. It could just be on one single clinical trial, or it could be on other aspects beyond the research program. It could be on access issues, it could be on pricing, it could be on regulatory issues. And this same group of patients, who is a continuous group of patients, follows the product through the life cycle and advises many sponsors in a similar way in the same disease area. And this, by having the patients in control, avoids selection of patient reps by the sponsor. And what this means is that both the agenda as well as the secretariat are really driven by the patients. And I like this slide because it sort of gives an idea of what the world looked like before 1995. And it was when, at least in my world, in HIV, we were running around like crazy people like wild people from one meeting to another, where sponsor A would have an individual meeting with some patients, get advice, and then go away and do the same thing with clinicians or other experts. Then a new sponsor would come, they would put together their own meeting. They would have a meeting with patients on one side and with clinicians possibly the next day, and that would just go on and on and on in a really tiring and difficult sort of life cycle at least for the patients. So we decided that another way might be possible, where we would be the driving organizers, where the patients would be in the center and the patients would invite the sponsors to come to meetings, and if and when necessary, also other experts like clinicians, experts in different areas. And just quickly, I think that each of the two speakers will go more in depth into this, but these are all the areas where community advisory boards can really give important advice to companies. I won't go through it all because, again, the speakers will do so, but it will be everything from one single clinical protocol all the way through these different points in the development pipeline, and including, for example, compassionate use, which I think is very important, something that patients are really always very very interested in working with the sponsors on. And I think that we've shown with the CABs, the community advisory boards that have set up, that there are lots of positives for doing it this way, where patients are in the driver's seat. These are sort of high-level goals and not always easily seen in the short term, but the idea is that the development time of products can be shortened, that patient-related, patient-relevant outcomes and outcome measures can be more patient-friendly, that hopefully because patients have involved in designing the trials, that recruitment will be faster and maybe there will be less dropouts. Companies can start thinking about aligning their data with registries, especially in my case in rare diseases. I think it's really important. So many diseases don't have registries, that all the natural history information is really in each company's database. And so that's something that we could work on together also. I think that CABs are an important moment for sponsors to start actually seeing people with the disease and understanding why they're doing what they're doing. I don't think we can underestimate the power that patients have just by sitting in a room with sponsors of a trial. And finally, I think that the end results are faster approval and hopefully easier access to the product, to the product in development. I just wanted to mention that I work specifically in rare disease community advisory boards at EUPATI, and we will be having a roundtable meeting in Barcelona about CABs in October. So please, if you're not on EUPATI mailing list, please consider being so. My email is down here below, and I just wanted to say that right now we have running 3 community advisory boards for cystic fibrosis, for Duchenne, as well as for tuberous sclerosis, and we're hoping to get many more up and running over the next year or so. So for me, that's all I have, and I think I will read the biographies of the 2 presenters and then hand right over to Giulio. Giulio Maria Corbelli was diagnosed with HIV in 1997. He's a member of EATG, the European AIDS Treatment Group. He is the chair of the Ecab, which stands for the European Community Advisory Board, and he's a member of the Policy Working Group at EATG. He is a member of the Executive Committee for the Partner Study. He's a member of the Community Advisory Group for the Insight Network. He's a member of ABAC's project PX-ROAR Europe, and is a member of the editorial board for the European Patients Academy. In Italy, Giulio is a member of the board of directors of PLUS, the first network of LGBT people living with HIV, and he's also a member of the panel for the antiretroviral guidelines at the Italian Ministry of Health. Giulio also works as a freelance journalist for magazines and websites. And let me read the introduction for Jan, and then I'll hand it back to you, Giulio. Jan Geisler is the founder and CEO of Pathvocates, a think tank on patient advocacy, health policy, and medical research. He was the director of the European Patients Academy from 2012 to 2017, and manages now the EUPATI Futures team, as well as the German EUPATI platform. Jan is a work package leader of the new IMI2 funded EU project Harmony on big data for better outcomes in hematology. Jan is a leukemia survivor since 2001. He also co-founded LeukaNet, or leukemyonline.de, in 2002. He founded the European Cancer Patient Coalition in 2003. And the CML Advocates Network in 2007, as well as the Leukemia Patient Advocates Foundation in 2011. Jan represents patients on a number of advisory boards and committees like ECHO, ESMO, ISPOR, Berlin Institute of Health, and the International CML Foundation. He is a member of the EHA's European Affairs Committee and the EuroBloodNet EPAG. So welcome both of you, and now I will just turn it over to you, Giulio, and you can talk a little bit about EATG's Ecab. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Rob, and thank you everybody for joining this webinar. So Rob already introduced me. My name is Giulio Maria Corbelli. I come from Italy, Rome, and I will try to present briefly about our experience at the European Community Advisory Board for HIV and how this was set up, what are its objectives, and also the ways it works. So please, next slide. The European Community Advisory Board was set up in 1997. It was a very peculiar moment for HIV because in 1996, so 1 year earlier, the new treatment options came out, and which transformed HIV infection from kind of a death sentence to something manageable. So people were able to survive, to live with HIV with these new treatment options. So as you can understand, at this moment, there was a huge need from the community to know more about these treatment options, to have access to them, which is kind of really important for people who were supposed to die soon, just 1 year earlier. So there was really a huge involvement from the community to understand more about the treatment, to have access to them, and also to try and provide a feedback about how to develop new treatments, because a lot of drugs were in development at the time, which could address the issues faced by the people living with HIV. So in this very peculiar moment, a group of European activists, following some example coming from the US, they tried to coordinate themselves to present themselves as a unique group towards other stakeholders, mainly pharmaceutical companies who were developing the new drugs at that moment. So this new group take the form of a community advisory board. Advocates and activists coming from several European countries joined together. They were meeting with the pharmaceutical industry, discussing with them all the issues related to the treatment options. This, a bit later, became a part of the larger organization, which is called European AIDS Treatment Group, which is a European voluntary patient organization. And then during time, the group became bigger and bigger, and we have now more than 100 members at Ecab, covering most of the European countries. And with the European countries, I mean the European region defined by the World Health Organization, WHO. So it goes from Europe to Central Asia. Next slide, please. Thanks to this work as a community group with pharmaceutical companies and drug developers, the Ecab was able to achieve some very important milestones, like better defining the criteria for clinical trials, especially for treatment-naive patients, so to make them safer for those participating into the trial, but also trying to monitor constantly the registration, reimbursement, and availability of drugs within all the European countries, working out and maintaining this access template to monitor all the issues. Ecab members were also involved in clinical trials as member of the data safety monitoring boards, but also in protocol reviewing, for example. So the discussion taking place at Eca meeting was just a part of the scientific involvement of Eca members, but they also contributed to medicine development through protocol review and also being members of the DSMB. And also the interaction was not limited to pharmaceutical companies, but also some other institutions, and mainly the European Medicine Agency, which was kind of created a few years before Ecab. So there was this interaction in a very early stage of the agency life. Next slide, please. Other milestones, we can list the fact that many HIV patients were involved in institutions at the European but also international level. For example, the WHO Europe agency has a strong interaction with the EATG and the Ecab, but also other research groups, also academia, for example. We had a strong interaction. We'll also invite them to Eca meetings from time to time. in this way, the Ecab works were recognized by the structures at the European level, and so we are invited to conferences. We are part of the guideline panels and all this kind of activities. And based on our experience, we are also trying, especially in the recent years, to help other patient organizations in other disease areas developing a similar structure or adapting the Ecab structure to their needs, so that to create a better interaction between patients and stakeholders, mainly pharmaceutical industries. Next slide, please. This map tries to explain how the Ecab works within the EATG context and in the global context of pharmaceutical and scientific research. So, as you can see in this, at the center of the picture, there is the European Health Treatment Group, the EATG, which has mainly 3 working groups. The PWG, which stands for Policy Working Group, is more related to access issues, reimbursement, pricing, and also rights of people living with HIV. Then there is the Training Group, which is, as the name says, the more focused on capacity development for members of the EATG, but not only. And then there is the scientific group, so to say, which is Ecab, the European Community Advisory Board. Some EATG members may be members of Ecab, but also of other working groups. Also at Ecab, we have some people who are not member of EATG, because it's a more a European open group to meet with stakeholders. And as you can see, Ecab can meet with pharmaceutical companies, but also with other patient organizations, CABs, or with public and international institutions, mainly through the EATG representatives there, and with the scientific community as a large. In order to do so, the European AIDS Treatment Group has some people working at the office, and they are really very, very useful, strongly needed to move forward all the work which is done with all the institutions and the stakeholders, because the members they can give their voluntary time, but we need some people who can work actually on these topics. So next slide, please. Let's see a bit how the Ecab is structured and how it works. And the most important part are money, is money as usual. So Ecab budget is integrated into EATG budgets, and pharmaceutical companies can contribute to this work through the core funding, but they also support the Eca Meetings. So anytime they come to an Eca meeting, they pay a fee to take part in this meeting, and this fee will cover the expenses for organizing the meeting itself. And also sometimes pharmaceutical companies can sponsor specific projects. Just an example, we are trying to improve the knowledge among the HIV community in Europe about the cure research, HIV cure research going on. So sometimes pharmaceutical companies can contribute to these activities, to these workshops through funding. So in this picture, you know very well that it is some kind of challenging to have an interaction with the pharmaceutical companies, and also to be funded by pharmaceutical companies, especially in some European countries where there is a ban on direct to consumer advertising from pharmaceutical companies. So in the next slide, please, we can see how we try to address this issue. First of all, I want to mention the fact that being funded by pharmaceutical companies does not prevent Ecab from being independent, because we can certainly raise our voices against some pharmaceutical companies if they are not acting in a way we consider useful for people living with HIV. and that's had never had any impact on the other collaboration we have with pharmaceutical companies, either on funding or other kind of collaboration. So in general, the Ecab meetings are focused on the scientific issues, so on medicine research and development, and they are held under confidentiality because sometimes pharmaceutical companies can present some data which are not in the public domain. The main objective is to create an exchange between community and industry so that industry can plan the R&D in a way which is closer to the needs of people living with HIV. Of course, we select our participants trying to have a high level of interaction. So those attending the Ecab meetings are those who are very well prepared about the scientific issues, but we also give some room for younger or less expert members so that they can learn from attending the meeting. So in this context, we think that this model cannot be seen as direct-to-consumer marketing of drugs. On the other hand, we are working hard to try and diversify the funding of Ecab, trying to involve non-pharmaceutical and public funders. But I think that all of you know how challenging this can be. Next slide, please. It's coming. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, that's it. So this is just to show that the need to create a community advisory board comes from the fact, the observation that many different stakeholders are working separately on a topic of common interest, so to say. So pharmaceutical industries is developing a medicine because they want to provide some benefit to the patients, and of course, and earn money. The regulatory institutions and other institutions are trying to set up the framework where a patient can improve their lives, can have their lives improved by medicines, but also by other health interventions. Academia also performs some research, which usually does not come into the market directly, but the research performed by academia is really important to provide advancement for medicine development. So all these groups are working on something which is of common interest, but there are not so many opportunity for interaction among these stakeholders. So the Community Advisory Board is created just to try and put together all these institutions, all these stakeholders, so that maybe with a joint effort, some quicker and also more effective results can be achieved. This is the general approach that we have. Next slide, please. So the Ecab work is not only related to Ecab meetings. We have our regular meetings with pharmaceutical companies, but also there is a substantial and constant back office work at the office, as I said before, by the scientific officer and also the hepatitis officer. We also have a lot of interaction via email in our mailing list at the organization. So we try to discuss all the scientific issues and then to plan an intervention and an action plan, to have an action plan about those issues and try to address them both in the meeting with pharmaceutical companies, but also trying to see whether other actions are needed, and that can be done at the office level, which is very important. Next slide, please. Let's see some practicalities of the Ecab meetings, which are of course, one of the most important part of our work. So usually the Ecab meetings are held over the weekends from Friday to Sunday. There are 5 sessions, so to say, 5 units: Friday morning, Friday afternoons, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, and Sunday morning. And companies can present during this session, either during one session of this or 2 sessions, so a half a day or a full day. The meetings with company, as I said before, are conducted under strict confidentiality so that they can present also unpublished data. And usually we reserve the Sunday morning meetings for an internal discussion and also some training sessions where we try and discuss and present about some topics we need to understand better as a group of our advocates. Again, the full-time staff at the ATG is really helpful in trying and defining all these activities. Next slide, please. Let's see how we set up our agenda. As Rob mentioned during his introduction, the agenda is set up by Ecab, by the community. This is kind of important because pharmaceutical companies may attempt to present about the things they are interested to, and this is okay. I mean, of course, this can be quite interesting, but we know the needs, our needs, the needs of people living with HIV, so we know which topics should be addressed to address those needs. And that's why the agenda, as a the first draft agenda, should be set up by the community according to our experiences. The agenda includes both the clinical trials about all the compounds in development for that company we are meeting with, but not only in development, also marketed drugs, of course, are topic of discussion, so that we can address issues related from phase 2 trials to phase 4, so post-marketing trials also. There are some topics suggested by companies which can be integrated into the agenda. And all this work is usually done by an Ecab member, who takes the role of company liaison, so to say. So he or she interacts directly with company representatives, and also he or she follows up very strictly all the research going on for that company. So he monitors all the trial results and so on, and try to provide a list of questions to be addressed during the meeting. I must say that in recent years, I don't know whether this is an experience common also to other disease areas, the pharmaceutical companies became more and more strict about how to set up the agenda. So they say they cannot address any topic which is not included in the list of questions sent beforehand, before the meeting. This is kind of some legal requirement internal to the companies, apparently, so they need to know all the questions in advance. Some companies are more, so to say, elastic about this topic, so they do their best to answer also questions which are not included in the list presented before the meeting. Others are a bit stricter on that, but this is also another barrier, so to say, in the interaction which is coming up in the recent years. So before the meeting with the companies, anyway, we have a kind of briefing, internal briefing, a pre-meeting to present the agenda, go through the list of questions and trying to understand if there are other topics of interest. So we have a preparatory pre-meeting during the Ecab meeting itself. And all the meetings are minuted, and the minutes are shared with the companies and, of course, among members also. The next slide is my last slide, and this is the reference to a publication which was made some years ago about the work of Ecab within EATG. So you can check this publication if you want to get more information. I also would like to mention that this presentation is part of a starter kit, a EUPATI starter kit about community advisory board, which you can find on the EUPATI website. And of course, I'm happy to answer any question you may have. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a million, Giulio. I put in the little chat box that I'd like you to ask questions during the talks as well, but maybe I can open it up for a couple minutes now. Giulio, I have one question to get it started with you. I've noticed in HIV, I have a little experience in HIV, that over the years, the safety of drugs, you mentioned safety, that drugs seem to be getting less and less toxic, and more people are able to tolerate them better. Do you think that companies, having worked with community advisory boards over the years, do you think that they have helped in making that a reality?
Oh, sure. and I think you know even better than me about that. Yeah, of course. I mean, just during the first years of antiretroviral therapy, which means 96 to early 2000, the first wave, so to say, of drugs available, they were, of course, very effective because they saved a lot of life, but also they presented some kind of side effects or toxicity. And some of these toxicity were were brought to the attention of pharmaceutical industry, but also regulators, just by Ecab and the community as a large. For example, the problem of lipodystrophy, which was kind of common with some early antiretroviral drugs, was raised by the Ecab also at the EMA meeting, a meeting with the European Medicine Agency. And this brought to some more research in this field. So an observational study about the side effects of antiretroviral drugs was set up, which was called the DAD. And also some stricter monitoring of side effects of what was put in place. So I think that the issue of safety was raised by the community and was then followed up by other institutions. But also, for example, for pricing or accessibility of drugs, the same process took place in some countries, specifically in Central Europe, in some so-called low prevalence countries in Central Europe, where some drugs have not been available for a long time, despite they were available in other Western countries.
Great, thank you very much, Giulio. Due to the time, I think I'd like to pass on to Jan, and then we can come back hopefully at the end for a good section of question and answer. Okay, thank you very much, Giulio, and please, Jan, take it over. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay. Now I'm here. I was muted. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak about community advisory boards. I'm really excited to speak about this because it is really such an important topic. And I mean, Rob has said everything about myself. Most of people know me from my EUPATI role in the past. But what people probably don't know as much is that I've been myself a cancer patient advocate for 17 years. I've been part of clinical research myself, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Cml Advocates Network, which is a global network of leukemia patient organizations. And I'm going to speak a bit about what are the community advisory boards that we implemented based on what the EADG has done so tremendously effectively over the past years, and how we have expanded that also to other blood diseases now. So just very briefly, I don't want to speak too much about CML, but probably it's important for the context. Chronic myeloid leukemia is a disease that actually killed 50% of patients about 20 years ago. And it has gone through a dramatic, let's say, innovation chain of events, which actually makes that cancer a chronic cancer today, where almost everyone who can access current therapies actually can live a long life, almost similar to the general population. So we have the advantage of great drugs there, but a lot of problems as well, because if people can't access the drugs, it's still a deadly cancer. And because it's a chronified cancer, you need to take the drugs lifelong. At least about 3/4 of patients need to do that. And that basically led us years ago in 2005, when CML was still a very different thing. We started with 4 organizations, a global network of leukemia patient organizations. Over years, that's now grown to 118 leukemia patient organizations in 88 countries. You can see the countries we're covering with membership here are in dark green. And we're growing strongly at the moment in Africa and other countries as well. So it is really a global network. And why am I showing this? I just want to talk a bit about the challenges that we faced in the CML community. When we started the community advisory boards actually in 2016, we see that a lot of research has been going on and has led to the therapeutic situation we are here today. But still, I mean, we have barely any CML cure, and the trials that are being set up are often made without patient input. The way that CML patients are receiving care and also diagnostics are often not reflecting what patients need. Access to treatment and diagnostics is often suboptimal in some regions of the world. People just can't access the drugs because they can't even access diagnostics. The information that pharma is providing quite often doesn't really communicate what it should do, because it's done by some agencies. We've been invited to many pharmaceutical advisory boards over years, but quite often, because the agenda was defined by the company and by what the compliance department allowed them, were quite often not really meaningful to the community, and very often had little impact on the direction and action of the pharmaceutical companies. At least we couldn't see that what we said was actually then also being picked up, which also sometimes had to do with how the agenda was being set up, but also with regards to who was actually invited to these meetings. We felt as CML patients, because we are very, I would say, almost established community, we have the advantage of very good survival in the meantime, which means that many of us have been around 10 years in advocacy or 15 years, which we didn't expect when we were diagnosed. We have increasingly got a key role to play in how CML patient access support, treatment, care. But we also see that patient centricity, everybody's talking as we're doing this just for the patients, and our mission is patients, and we're so patient centric. We're the most patient centric organization in the world. But we know, I mean, about, let's say, marketing. In reality, quite often it's also just a glossy mission statement. But if you really look at how do patients need translate into real action, there's often a difference. So that was actually the situation we were in, and thanks to EUPATI and my opportunity actually to get to know a lot of very engaged individuals from the HIV community, like David Harry and Tamas Beretsky and Rob Camp, I actually learned what the HIV community has been doing for very long. And that was the Community Advisory Board. So what are the CML Caps? They are patient-run community advisory boards where the patient organization set the agenda and they invite the speakers. So it's us actually running the show. But we feel it's not a one-way thing. Of course, we want a two-way dialogue with researchers, academics, authorities, pharmaceutical industry to improve patients' well-being and outcomes. We insist on it's a dialogue. It's not we are demanding and getting back. Everyone actually needs to learn from that. For us, that's a difference to the EITG advisory boards, is that we are a global community. So our CML Caps a global CAP, which represents not only the Western countries, but also regions in Africa, regions in Asia, which have a very different healthcare situation and very different issues around access. So the challenges that we address in the CAPs are usually accessing diagnostics, monitoring, treatment, care, improving quality of patient information, improving patient education, develop better focused, patient-focused trials, and build the capacity and knowledge also in our own patient community through the CAP. I'm going to talk through a couple of these points during this webinar that you understand the rationale why we've done that in CML. And of course, I said we piggybacked on the EITG, and I'm really grateful for what I received from, for example, David Harry at that time, because the EITG people basically said, hey, we've done all that. We already have version 11 of our protocol or terms of reference, which describes topics, schedule, membership, governance, confidentiality, meeting minutes, evaluation, financing, company participants, and all these things which you can see on screen. All these were pretty well defined by the EITG, and we actually reused that, and they said, just reuse that, don't reinvent the wheel. So we did, and we adapted it to the cancer context of a rare cancer like CML. And I wouldn't say we needed to change a lot, because it was really well thought through how the EITG had done that. And I mean, Giulio has mentioned that, but I want to reiterate on the issue of confidentiality. And that's a very different thing, because when we go to pharma advisory boards, usually we get these kind of terms and contracts that totally forbid us to talk about anything. And we even sometimes give the intellectual property of what ideas we bring and what we bring into the meeting to the company. So we turned that around, and the confidentiality rules in the CML community advisory boards are not as strict. Of course, confidentiality is there. And for example, what is confidential, because we meet with individual companies, are corporate strategies, development pipelines, unpublished data, commercially sensitive informations, what were the discussions and which were the persons in the meetings and what did they say. So that's of course confidential, because we are aware that no company would actually speak out at such a meeting if they feel that the information they disclose during the meeting, like development pipelines or clinical trial protocols, would actually be communicated to the outside. So that's why each of our members of the CAP needs to sign a confidentiality agreement and needs to agree that they are not even providing the information they receive to their peers, because that would actually then spread around, and that would actually completely undermine the whole concept of the CAP. It must be firewalled. But what is also important is that non-confidential and public information will be discussed in these meetings. And we do not believe that everything should be confidential. Like if we're talking about concepts of treatment and care, if we talk about advocacy strategies or patient information or positions and takings that the CAP itself, the CAP members take, this must be public information, because we are accountable to our community, and because advocacy, patient advocacy, is the business of sharing and pushing forward solutions. We need to be able to talk about these things in the public. We cannot keep everything just confidential by default. And that's why there's a differentiation. We pretty much look at what is being presented also by the companies. We quite frequently ask, so is this really confidential, or can we talk about it? Because we don't want to be that closed club that doesn't talk about what is happening. So what's the typical setup of a CML CAP? That's very similar to how EITG has set it up. So you see here a couple of days. It's usually a 2 to 3 day thing. We have a training meeting in the beginning, which is an essential part. So no patient advocate is allowed in the company sessions without having participated in the training. Then there's a prep session where we train and prepare the sessions with the companies, for example, distribute questions and reiterate what kind of actions we had last time, or what we expect the companies probably to present, and so on. Then we have, for example, the green session would be company 1, the blue session would be company 2, in the evening another prep work, and then company 4 on day 3 and company 4 on day 3. So you see the different slots here, and that's probably is important to know. CAP is hard work. This is not warming chairs in an advisory board where nobody really needs to speak up. you need to be trained, you need to listen, you need to go to prep session. It's a very tough day of 8, 9, 10 hours. So it's really something where people need to give some commitment, because we do not want these advisory boards where everybody is in the end saying, well, this has been interesting, but there's actually no action and only 2 people have talked. But of course, that requires also quite some skills by the moderator or the facilitator that we usually have. So what is the requirement on the patient experts in the CML caps? We need patient experts who are outspoken, who are technically well trained. So if we talk about research, they need to know how research works. If we talk about access, they need to have know the fundamentals of how access works. So they are not selected because they have a board role. We select them for expertise. They need to work evidence-based, so not just gut feeling, but really, if possible, bring in evidence from your own community. They should be able to speak beyond their own case and country. So it's not important that they talk about Romania or Canada, but they talk about their broader issues, even though, of course, they bring examples from their country and their community, but they need to be, let's say, on top of things. And also, they shouldn't dominate the meeting. And this is difficult. If you just think about me, shutting my mouth is sometimes really not so easy. So that's also the facilitator really needs to make sure that everybody can speak up, and also that people do not drift away, because there are a million topics that would be interesting to discuss, but you can waste the whole CAP meeting in a dense agenda if you talk about things which are really off topic. So how we started, actually 15 members. We had the board of the CML Advocates Network, the global network, where we have 3 permanent members and 6 elected leaders from the 6 representing the 6 world regions. And then we have each of the 6 world regions representatives could appoint one of the best advocates from their region as an additional CAP member. So we started with 15, and over time we have expanded. We are now at 20 members because, for example, we added one advocate who has specific knowledge on pediatric CML, which is an ultra rare disease because it usually appears on an average at the age of 65. So that's the composition of our CAP. We have held 5 CML caps so to date, and I don't want to talk about the topics itself. You can see the number of companies are varying. Sometimes we had a full day with one company, sometimes a half day, sometimes we had 2, 3, or 4 companies. But what I wanted to tell is what kind of training we did. So the first cap was actually a training on how does drug development process work, based on EUPATI material, and then how does CML research work, where do all the different drugs sit in the drug development pipeline, what are the big players in CML research, also on the academic side. So we did training on drug development. On the second cap, we trained about partnerships and community advisory boards as an advocacy tool. So how do we work with industry? How do we work with caps? How do we do caps and make them most effective? In the May CAP in 2017, we didn't do any training because we had 3 days of a conference before where there was a lot of advocacy training. In November 2017, we did training on the collaboration with industry, where we had a speaker from pharma and a speaker from HIV, actually, David, training us on how do you do a trustful, independent and transparent collaboration with industry. And in the recent CAP just 2 months ago, we had an in-depth training on patient-reported outcome tools, because we wanted to ask all the companies in the CAP what kind of tools they are using, why they're using tools that are not measuring anything meaningful in their trials, and how we can collaborate to make the, for example, collection of quality of life data in our trials more effective. The outcomes of the CAPs. We discussed the drug development pipeline. We were invited increasingly to investigator meetings. We got input into our CML Tri database, which we ran. We built background knowledge for regulatory discussions, and we had actually more and more advocates involved in CML drug development. We also had a very heavy dialogue about improving access to drugs, especially in the less well-off countries, and companies we experience, especially also the patient relations people in the Western world, are often not aware about the inequalities and real-world access issues outside of the big markets. And we, of course, learned a lot about the corporate access programs. We discussed improving collaboration with companies. We influenced the patient services developed by the companies, like patient support programs or the information material they provide. And probably one of the most important things, we really built the capacity of the CAP members, because they're much more knowledgeable today and much more, let's say, up to date and equitable partners when they're discussing with all kinds of stakeholders. Just some critical learnings. Don't let anyone take control over your meeting, because I must say, with the pharmaceutical caps that we had, some really struggle with giving away control, because they're used to run community advisory boards where they have full control over the agenda and what's happening. There have been some attempts which I would just want to describe. For example, one company tried to get unpleasant topics off the agenda, where we really had to insist, no, we're keeping this because this is the most important topic for our company, so bring somebody who's able to speak to about that. We had the feedback that there's new topic on this cap, it's the same like last time, and there we said, well, but because the follow-up actions have not been followed, we're going to take them off when we feel we have discussed enough about that. They sometimes bring people that have nothing to say or decide, and that's really frustrating, because we have a CAP meeting, we bring the best advocates worldwide from our community, and we expect the companies also to bring the best people from their side, because we want people that say, let's do this afterwards together on the company side or the patient side. We do not want just discuss it because it's been interesting and then we will get back to you on this and ask someone who knows. We even had one attempt that a company brought agency people, so from a PR agency, and they wanted to run one session and extend the time by double. So we actually prevented that. And what we also experience sometimes is that they waste your collective time with presentations about things you already know in order not to get to the sensitive topics. Basically, waste the time for time slot of 45 minutes that in the end you only have 5 minutes left to actually talk about the things you wanted to talk about. So these are just some very practical things. And of course, I don't want to give a negative impression about the CAPs, because they are one of the most valuable tools we have in our community. But you need to be very aware that it's a strategic tool, and the topics that we are interested in are sometimes very difficult to discuss. And there might be strategies actually to avoid getting into confrontation or the unpleasant things. But in the end, both sides benefit if they are being tabled. And what we've done is actually, we have had an experiment just 2 weeks ago. We have extended it to set up the first multi-company hematology cap. Hematology is our blood diseases. And we had a first cap with multiple companies in one room, so very different to the CML caps. So what we had, the outline was 12 pan-European hematology patient umbrellas could nominate one representative to come to the meeting, plus the 7 elected representatives of the EuroBloodNet European Reference Network. The training session was actually a 3 hours prep session where everybody could vent their concerns, because otherwise we keep talking about our own problems at the CAP. We had strategic alignment. We prioritized our questions. We distributed who's asking which question, and so on. So we did that on the day before. Then we had 9 companies. Each company was allowed to have an 8-minute elevator pitch with a clock that actually was ringing after 8 minutes. And then we had 45 minutes of quality time to discuss about the topics with all advocates and industry. And of course, we had identified some follow-up action. You can see the topics down there. Of course, they are cross-disease in blood diseases, so they're not as specific as the CML caps, where we talk about specific products, specific trials, and so on. But the discussions about patient engagement in hematology, industry R&D, or evidence generation evidence that we could generate to improve decision making in industry have been really interesting and really moving forward. And I think the issue about compliance and legal hurdles is a continuous topic for us that we need to overcome in collaboration with industry. So I would say it was very productive for us, for the whole community, and the feedback that we got from the companies was also that it was very productive and working. So what are the conclusions and lessons learned? And that's my last slide, because I see the time. We think the EITG Ecab model has been well established in CML and hematology. It's been a great template. It's been a fantastic platform to operate, and it's probably the most effective collaboration tool that we have between the patient organizations and industry today. The multi-company hematology cap has worked well, but of course, multi-disease, multi-company also has constraints that requires a different design. The preparatory sessions and training are crucial, and there's additional kickback for the community on that because we generate patient experts that actually can engage also on other platforms outside of the CAP. So it's really an important capacity building tool for us in CML. We're usually making the same mistake at packing too many topics in the agenda, maximum 3 topics for a 4-hour session. That's already almost enough, too much. We've made the experience 1.5 hours per topic, like in the hematology CAP, is advisable. The legal contracts with companies are a nightmare and still are a nightmare, and has taken us, made us our hair tear out to actually get there. And we heard so often this cannot work. We insist on the confidentiality agreements and so on. Don't let industry negotiate about the cap terms. If you work with a company, tell them, but you're doing this in CML, why can't you do it with us? Or you've been doing that in your virology department with the HIV guys, so why not with us? Don't let them negotiate the cap terms because they are well established and have been established for 15, 20 years. And I can just advise, we've been doing much as volunteers on top of things, build a secretariat. That's something we have now established with the first hematology cap. Because it is not just the meeting, it's the follow-up. And I think that's what Julio was outlining. You need to have the resources between the caps to actually make something meaningful about with what you discuss, either within your community or with the industry or academic partners that you have discussed with. And with that, I'm at the end, and I hand back to Rob.
Great, Jan. Thank you so much for that wonderful show of your CAB work. I have a specific question for you, although I think Julio could also maybe take a stab at it. But you showed a slide where there were many problems of CABs where they seemed to not do what the community wanted, and you sort of pushed back. Is there a worry or a concern that companies won't come back if patients are too demanding?
Well, I think what we experienced is that there's an increasing honesty and frankness about the do's and don'ts. So in the meantime, because they know that we're persistent on some topics, they also say, but we can't talk about this. I'm very sorry. So I don't think, I mean, it all needs to come under rules, and we always had a very good facilitator that helped us make sure that discussions are not going off track and that people are not getting aggressive and that they're not, let's say, over demanding, but are rational and evidence-based. And I think a lot has to do with that. And also I can advise on having that kind of venting exercise on the day before, because when we all had the time to complain, we're not going to complain in front of the companies. And probably the worst thing is that if we start to debate amongst each other and start to fight amongst ourselves, so we really need to align our things. But I would say pushing back and saying this is really what we want hasn't been a problem, because if we say this is why we want to know it and this is why we want to discuss with it, and there's a problem we want to solve, then it's a very positive thing.
And so I guess I'll ask the same thing from Julio, that I know that there have been tensions many times between the patient community and companies. Is that something that's easily resolved? Are companies sort of strong enough to go through it, or how do you deal with difficult issues with companies?
Yeah, well, I must say that I cannot remember of any company refusing to meet with Ecab because of having been attacked or criticized during the Ecab meetings. There were some occasions where Ecab refused to go on with a meeting with a company because they were not showing a collaborative approach. But sometimes companies simply do not agree to come to a meeting because they say they have nothing special to present about, or they are not that much involved in the research, of the pipeline is empty, so to say, at that moment. But being a criticist towards companies never produced a pushback, so to say. I think that the most important part is trying to show that your work with pharmaceutical companies is of value, is valuable for them too. So if they acknowledge that this work is, has some value, they will accept also some even strong and very hard criticism, because they can see the value also in that. You know, companies are not all the people within one company, within each company, has the same attitude, the same position. So maybe you can try to be more aggressive, so to say, of course in a figurative way, towards some people, and trying to establish a connection with others just to come around the obstacles there. So it's a matter of politics, unfortunately. So it's not only science, but also trying to address the issues in the way you can get the most valuable result.
And I mean, just adding to this, what we feel after 5 caps is that the companies have started to understand that this is the opportunity to meet the most informed patients from a community. There's no other form. Even if they did their own community advisory board, it wouldn't work, because they wouldn't get the same group together like we do. And when, for example, one company complained, but because in the first one they didn't know what they're getting into, so they didn't come well prepared. For the second one, they were well prepared, but said, but we have had to invest so much time into that. Then we said, well, but you're investing so much time in your own meetings, not only financially, but in time. Is it really so much to actually get to this meeting? Because in 4 hours, you have so much quality input from the leaders. Do you get that anywhere else? But of course, we are demanding, so you should, on the topics that we set on the agenda, you need to prepare, but it's a good investment. And I think that's well understood.
Great. We're over time, but I do have one more question for each of you. And if you could just sort of make it brief, that would be helpful. But I think because we're talking about a lot of times science, I'm interested in how do we evaluate this? How do we actually show that this is meaningful or makes a difference? And if it's okay, Giulio, to start with, we have until 6:30. Thank you. Great. So we don't have to rush. Okay. So Giulio and Jan, I think that it's really important that we're able to show the good that comes out of it, not only from our perspective, but also from a company side. Do you evaluate, or will you evaluate? I know at least in your case, Jan, it's more recent, but I think evaluation would be a very useful tool to have.
Yes, I'm not sure I can get exactly your question, but you're talking about science. So of course we are all following the evidence-based method. So when we talk about being knowledgeable about science, we think about knowing about the studies, the trials, the results, how they can be interpreted, stuff like that.
Yeah, but Julia, what I referred to, sorry, what I was referring to was, how do we show the value of a cab? In other words,
okay.
I mean, just because I mentioned science, because that's what science wants to see. What's the result? So,
well, when you discuss with the pharmaceutical companies about the drug development plan, for example, for something which is not on the market yet, you can see some changes from sometimes. So if you do protocol reviewing also, or if you simply discuss the development plan with the company, you sometimes can see some changes. Your proposal can be accepted and included in the plan. Other times this is a bit more disappointing, because they have some reasons from their point of view not to include your suggestion. we have a kind of list and monitoring of what is accepted and not, because at the end of the meeting, also via the minutes, you can send some action points, and then you follow up in the next months about those action points. So you can monitor strictly what is going on about the things that have been discussed.
Great, thanks. And Jan, do you have any experience or thoughts about evaluating the CAB itself and its usefulness?
Well, I think we do the same like EATG. So we have all the open actions in the minutes, and of course we look at on which we have been following up on each site. And when we generate the next agenda, we actually keep things on the agenda that haven't been worked up. I think we could be better in follow up. But in general, we do that. We usually do a survey after the CAB on both sides to collect feedback. I wouldn't say we learn a lot from that because people are very positive about the meetings, but to extract, let's say, meaningful metrics for performance is a bit difficult to do, but probably we're not asking the right questions yet. But in general, I think it's more the qualitative feedback that we get and that we see in terms of impact on the trial protocols, in terms of that we move the needle on access in specific countries. And the starting point was actually that we tabled the things with the right people in the company CAB and so on. So we can see things moving on and we can see that things are being worked on then based on the feedback we get. But we don't measure that, we see that.
Great, thank you. One thing that I've seen in the new CABs that we're setting up in rare diseases is that both of you actually said it, but I just want to underline it, and maybe both of you can expand on it a little bit. But I think that the administration and, for example, the minutes are really vital to making it really useful and helpful to everyone present. Do you share your minutes with the companies, or how does that work?
Yes, we share it. We share the minutes with the pharmaceutical companies, so they can also sometimes provide some inputs and some suggestion about the minutes. Usually, they do not ask for topics to be removed from the minutes, but they can simply try and correct some sentences in the right direction, so to say. I think that having a some useful minutes from the meeting, in my experience, my own experience as Ecab chair, is one of the most challenging actually tasks, because you're right, Rob, it is very useful, very valuable, but it is not that easy to have a document which is at the same time comprehensive, but also not verbatim of the meeting itself, because it would be too huge, too big to be useful. So also, the minute taker is one of the most important role, and he or she should be very well prepared so that he can or she can understand the discussion and report about it in a very useful and concise way.
I can just agree, the minutes are very important. We're doing two versions of minutes. We're doing the confidential set of minutes, and these are shared with the companies, but they remain within those that have signed the confidentiality agreement. So also advocates are not allowed to share these minutes outside to other advocates or of course companies, but not to anyone else who has not signed the CAB confidentiality agreement, because they might have let's say really confidential information in there that is commercially sensitive or sensitive for the patient organizations. And there's a public set of minutes that we give to our member organizations to inform them about which topics we have discussed, what the main outcomes were. But of course, if we have, for example, details on trial protocols and so on, we remove that from the public or member version of the minutes. Getting these minutes compiled is really complex. I totally agree, because it's a highly dense, very fast, very intense discussion on things. So they need to, compiling those is not easy. We usually send them to the companies as soon as we have them, but we give them time of tacit approval. So actually they have 14 days to respond to the draft and make suggestions for amendments. But because this can take forever in the compliance process, and you can only follow up if you have the minutes. That's why we say here are the minutes, and you have 14 days to respond. No response will mean tacit approval, and this has not been challenged so far. So I think it's a process that works.
Great, thank you. I would like to remind everyone that you also can ask questions if you just type in the little box down below. Otherwise, I'm just going to continue with my questions because I find this fascinating. One thing that, again, for both of you that I think you touched on that is maybe worth exploring a little bit more is that why is this model better than a company-sponsored advisory board? Many pharma companies have ad boards, and when I now go to a company and say, I have a community, they're interested in meeting with you, they say, oh, we already have our ad board. We don't really need to plug into anything new. Why is this version more useful than their version?
Well, I think there are two main factors which are different, and there are shortcomings of company organized advisory boards. Shortcoming one is actually that in company organized advisory boards, only topics that compliance departments and legal departments allow will get on the agenda. That's why often we experience that the companies would actually like to discuss some of the topics, but they're not allowed to because it might be about a trial, a product, whatever. And there's a difference whether we are inviting and asking the company to report back on a topic rather than if they invite patients or patient advocates to respond to their questions. So compliance-wise, that's the difference. And the second difference is on the composition of these meetings, because we experience that in many company advisory boards, the selection of people that come is quite political. So there might be also patient advocates from our side that a national affiliate, a strong national affiliate of that company has selected, but that they might select that person not because of the greatest competence on the topic discussed, but because there is a good relationship to that organization. So what we experience sometimes, and I need to be very self-critical of our own community, sometimes what these companies are inviting are the people that like to go to meetings, but not the people that are the best ones in a specific topic like access or drug development pipeline and so on. So I think by us actually setting the agenda and actually getting the right people from our side into the room for the topics and demanding from the companies to bring their key experts in that space, that's something that is very difficult to implement from the company side.
Giulio, do you agree with that?
Yeah, of course, I do agree. And I think that Jan said everything. I can just add that there is a concept, a different concept between the two models. If the community establish a CAB, that's the community. I mean, that's something coming from the community. We are those preparing, working on it, and trying to set the objectives and see the strategies. Everything is on our hands. So it's just exactly the translation of the principle of nothing about us without us. While if a CAB is set up by a company, it can be useful to make their action more friendly towards community, but all the obstacles which have been explained by Jan are there, and so it's something different from the conceptual point of view.
Thanks. My other question really is to talk a little bit about being too comfortable with companies. I'm sorry if Jan, that isn't what you said, but I'm a little interested in the idea of how to navigate the money issue and being comfortable with companies in a closed room, and then maybe being accused either by other people in the community or by the press that something illicit is going on between these two groups. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because it's a concern, and it's something I see not often, but I do see it. I'll throw you out first, Jan.
Okay. I mean, it's always, I mean, that's a basic element of our patient advocacy work, irrespective of the caps. Funding for patient organization is a problem. Industry funding is being criticized and is under high scrutiny. Alternatives are largely not there, especially for pan-European or global organizations, because they cannot fundraise on the local level. So it is a problem. And of course, there were concerns that companies were saying, you are coming to your meeting, we need to pay that we come to your meeting. Very strange. But I mean, look at what the platform is. It needs funding, because if you look at the global Cml Cap, we need to fly in people from all continents actually to that meeting. So there are considerable costs, and because we're very efficient with our team, we still organize that meeting at a fraction of the cost what the corporate advisory board costs. Because we don't use expensive agencies and we are quite cost efficient in how we organize these things. So I would say a community organized cap comes at a fraction of the cost of a corporate cap. But of course, I mean, we cannot say money is not growing on trees. So the money is coming from industry for the industry caps. Because there's no way around that, and there's no way you can just do that with volunteers where everybody's doing that in the extra hour. All that, flights and people, cost money, and that needs to be covered. But I think in the process, how we're defining the agenda and the way things are, let's say, very transparent what we do, I don't see a big issue around that. Of course, I'm still looking for the trees that grow money, because then this whole discussion is gone.
Well, let me know when you find it. Julio, do you have anything to add to that about being too comfortable with companies?
I just want to say that I personally never felt uncomfortable by the fact that Ecab and the EATG is funded by pharmaceutical companies. So I know that some people think that EATG is not independent enough because of that, because of the funding received by pharmaceutical companies. I acknowledge and admire those organizations who struggle to survive without getting any funding from pharmaceutical companies. There are very, very few of them, actually. But I really don't think, as I said before during my presentation, that receiving funding from pharmaceutical companies does not allow you to be also very clear and to stand in an independent and clear position against some actions that you do not like coming from that company. So I really don't see that problem. And then there are all the problems that Ian was mentioning related to the difficulty, the challenges related to diversify your funding as a community or a patient organization. This is really challenging. We are EATG has been struggling for years now to try and diversify its funding. It is not that easy at all.
And I can probably just the last thing, because you said, are we then being too friendly to the companies? I mean, if the confidentiality rules wouldn't exist, I would love to have the people that criticize us for that to attend one of the CML community advisory boards, because they would actually witness that we have a very constructive dialogue and a very intense dialogue, but it doesn't mean we're not tearing feathers in these meetings. I mean, probably the EATG or the ECAPs of the HIV community have been much more pushy because the community had to do the groundwork that we are benefiting from by doing that 15 years later, because patient advocacy established and accepted, which wasn't the case 15, 20 years ago. But I would say our discussions are never unfriendly, but very, very frank. We are very demanding, and I don't think any of our advocates is influenced by that their flight was paid to the cap to tell them that people are dying in our community because they can't access the drugs, or because their neighboring country can access it but they can't, or that, let's say, the trial protocol is crap and will not recruit. We hear all these things, and we usually, when we say that, we clearly justify and tell the reasons why we think this is not going to work. So I must say I have had no evidence of let's say us being soft because there's industry funding. Let's say we are on a mission here to actually make things better, and we know that the people on the other side also try to do the best things under the, let's say, framework of a commercial company, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
Great. We do have a question come in from Jennifer asking, how do you go about choosing the best people or the best advocates that want to be part of your CAB? Does this cause tension within a community if some people are not picked or allowed in?
Oh my God. Yes, was one of the most challenging tasks as Ecab chair, selecting the participants, because yeah, some people may be disappointed by the fact that they are not selected to the meeting. I mean, it is the criteria are there. The expertise, the ability to also to report at the meeting what they know about the situation in the local setting, also the ability to interact with the pharmaceutical companies, or the willingness to learn and to improve their capacities. Then there is the geographical scope. We try to select people coming from different regions, the gender balance also, and also some kind of age balance, trying to have young people and older people. There are so many criteria, so many principles to take into account, and then you come up with a list of people, and someone will be disappointed. But that's human, that's understandable. You just have to explain what you did and to try and make people understand that.
Great. And Jan, I see you put up your slide again.
Yeah, well, I mean, we are not there yet in CML. I mean, Julio has presented how many people are on the CAP, and it's very clear that the Ecab needs to take decisions on who can attend and who can't, because the majority of people on the CAP can't. Just because an effective meeting size is probably 15 to maximum 20, 25 people. Everything beyond gets difficult to moderate, and not everybody can speak. So I would say the EATG has the experience in selecting people and taking those kind of difficult decisions. We are just in front of that in CML because we've grown in the CAB, because we had to replace people because one couldn't make it. Then they replaced somebody else from the world regions, but the old one also wants to stay on it. And of course, the group is growing. And we also see that in some CABs, people haven't spoken a word all across the whole CAB. So we need to do some training and, let's say, making them more outspoken. But there will be a point also for our community where we probably need to decide that we can only invite a subset of them to the next meeting. And I anticipate some difficult discussions. I understand, Julio, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's in the end the chair of your ECAB that decides who actually comes, and people have to apply. Probably you could elaborate a bit more on that. But I think we probably need to, in our future CML CABs, we need to think about, of course, gender equality, representativeness of the different world regions, specific knowledge on the topic that is being discussed, and so on. And probably in the future, we need to make choices, invite those advocates which on these different categories are probably the best ones for a specific CAB.
Yes, I can confirm that the final decision is up to the chair. Unfortunately, I must say, since I'm covering this role, so I take the responsibility of the final decision. But I try. But in general, as a process, the Ecab chair tries to involve other relevant people in the discussion, and one very relevant and important person to be involved in this decision, in this discussion, is the scientific officer, so the people working at the office for the Ecab meeting, because they of course know better all the processes. We also try to involve some representatives from the board of directors of the organization, and sometimes there are some people who are more involved in the preparation of the meeting that can provide some suggestion on the decision.
Great. I have a question here coming in from Yop, who asks, how is the funding of all activities regulated? I don't know how specific we need to get, but maybe you could just talk about how the money comes in and how you report having spent it.
Oh, that's a kind of difficult question for me. I mean, because we have a financial officer at the office, and luckily she takes care of all these processes. But I know that there is a formal request to be sent out to the companies before the meeting, so that they have the invitation and the formal request for funding for the meeting. Then this request is processed within the company, and they come up with a decision, and they do the bank transfer. And this is also reported back by our financial officer with all the expenses that have been afforded and how the money has been spent. So everything is very transparent about how we receive money and how we spend it for the meeting.
And it's in your annual report, I suppose.
Yeah, sure, of course, which is public, which is yeah.
Okay. And Jan?
Well, just to add to that, there's a fee for each company to attend the CAP, and there's a fee for a half-day CAP and a fee for a full-day CAP, and that fee is the same for any company. So there is no special deal, no special price. It's all the same. And it's always the same sum. I mean, the contractual arrangements are usually a nightmare, because one calls it grant, the other one financial support, third one donation, and whatever. So every company has a different preference, which makes things a bit complex. But in the end, the challenge for us is, if we have two companies joining the CAP, we might be making a small loss, because we need to fly in people from all across the world. If we have 3 companies, we'll probably break even. If we have 4 companies, there's a leftover that actually funds part of our staff also working on these things. So it's always a bit of a financial risk to run the CAP, and to make sure that in the end you're not reducing reserves that patient organizations anyhow usually don't have. So it's a complex thing, but I think it's well communicated what the fees are, and how that the procedure works. And we have withstood so far any attempts by the companies to negotiate the fee. And they anyhow, through all their public registers, also need to disclose the financial support they give to patient organizations. So there is transparency about what is being paid for that.
One more question about the people who are in the CAB. Do they need to be part of a patient organization? This is from Eric. Or can they be individuals just who with the disease, or who know someone with the disease? Or do they need to be from an organization?
Well, the ECAB model, the EATG model, to be more precise, is of individual members of the organization. So each member of the organization is a person, and he or she is a member of the organization on a personal level. Then, of course, all of them have some affiliation at the national level. They work at the national level. And of course, as I said before, this is something that can help them to be more able to provide a feedback about what's going on in the national or local context. So, because at the Ecab meetings, in the Ecab work in general, sometimes can be very important to know what's going on in Romania or in the Czech Republic or in Italy and so on. So this is, of course, a criteria which can influence the selection. In our experience, Ecab members do not need to be affiliated to other organizations, even though usually they are.
And yeah,
I mean, for us, it's very different because, I mean, on one hand, the CML Advocates Network is a network of organizations. So we have 118 organizations from 88 countries in our network. And of course, the people we are in touch with are usually leaders in those networks. So, and the way we have appointed CAP members are that we have elections every 2 years, and for the 6 world regions elect one leader from their community to actually be on the CML Advocates Network Steering Committee, and they are members of the CAP. Because what is, I think, important in our CAPs is that these people not only have the overview of their specific country or even their individual experience with treatment or disease, but they need to, let's say, speak beyond their case and country. So I would say all of our CAP members are embedded in organizations, because that's the only way they can move from their subjective individual patient experience to an overview of what the whole peer group in that region and the subgroups of CML patients in that region actually are being challenged with and need and have in terms of unmet need. So kind of, let's say, broader insight into the region is really essential. And that's why for us, it doesn't need to be the president of an organization. So it's not important which role they have, but they need to have that kind of organizational affiliation because that gives them the broader knowledge that they need to give feedback on the topics that we're discussing in the CAP.
Wow, great. Thank you very much. We're just a minute over time, so I'd like to thank you both very much for all of your good advice and your great presentations and your work in community advisory boards. There were a couple of questions about where the Ecab slides can be found, etc. And I think that what will happen is that these slides will become available within 1 week or so on the EUPATI site, and you just need to go to the European Patients Academy to be able to find the webinar, and you'll be able to see all the slides again, along with the voice as well. All right. So once again, thank you everyone for a terrific job today and for being with us for this hour and a half, these 90 minutes, and take care and good night.